Good morning, everyone. This is Dwayne Schultes from Science Business. I'd like to thank all of you for being with us this morning. Today's topic of this webinar will be how Europe can build on its leading position in regenerative medicine and stem cells. And we'll be having quite an august group of individuals. Ruth McKernan from Untitled, which is Weiser Stem Cell Research Group. Mr. Schlebus, Director of Policy, Catherine Littler from Wellcome Trust, Theo Mert from Janssen Pharmaceutica. I'd also like to thank the sponsors of this project that included Pfizer, Janssen, Wellcome Trust, FPA, and the UK representation to Brussels, who have made this project possible. I just want to go through a little bit about the procedures for today. We do have 90 participants today who have signed up for this webinar, and again, I thank all of you very much. We will be able to take your questions, but given the amount of people who are with us, it's going to be very difficult to do so with microphones. So please use the embedded chat function, which we have here in the system. I'll now send you a little hello message. So you can use this chat function to send questions back and forth to us, and I'll be keeping my eye on it. And we'll try and forward the questions to the relevant people as we go forward. Just so you know, we will be taking questions. We should have about a half hour, 20 minutes at the end to answer the questions that you may have. Just want to touch a little bit to remind everyone of where things were roughly 6 months ago. What had happened in the stem cell area, Europe had assumed a bit of a research lead due to things that had been going on internationally. And what we had was a situation where Degeneration, which was one of Europe's first companies who had actually had a product for sale in Europe, had been denied FDA approval. Now this was a problem because it potentially shut off or caused a lot of concern about one of the main lines of commercialization for European companies, particularly small ones, who were trying to grow, which was you get your approval in the U.S. and then through the reciprocal agreements with the FDA and EMA, you could then, even if you're European, sell in the United States. And this was a bit of a shock because this was the first, major breakthrough company in stem cells that had gone on to try and utilize this FDA channel to monetize and stay afloat, and it didn't work. And so that started causing a lot of issues, and they saw a huge drop in their valuation. This was then followed up by the now legendary Weiser ruling, where the European Court of Justice ruled that you cannot patent embryonic stem cell therapies. Again, embryonic are only one research line, but still this caused a great amount of concern. And then this was followed up by and used as the basis of several folks in the European Parliament, several MEPs, who had then used this intellectual basis of the Weiser ruling to say that we should not be funding stem cells under Horizon 2020. So basically 6 months ago, things were looking fairly grim, and there was a lot going on that was causing us great concern. And then a few things started happening. First off, we had the Nobel Prize for Gurdon and Yamanaka. And those were two scientists in the 50s and 60s who had done pioneering work in stem cells, and they were obviously recognized for the Nobel Prize. We launched our project on October 18th in a high-level session supported by the British Ambassador to Belgium here in Brussels, and today, sort of here 5 months afterwards, this is the final report after that launch and some of the investigation we've been doing. We'll be discussing that today with several folks. The ITRA committee had decided that they would actually approve funding for Horizon 2020, so that went quite well, and we're very happy for that. And this still leaves a lot of questions as to what's going to happen in the European Council. And then on appeal, the legal definition of an embryo in patents was allowed, so basically allowing Brussels to get his patent, but this still leaves a large percentage of questions regarding what does it mean with the destruction of an embryo, because that was still limited by the German ruling. So we're still not sure, and there's still a lack of clarity there. The final report, obviously today we are launching the report, and this can be downloaded for free at sciencebusiness.net. Just go to the home page. You can do so now if you'd like. And I'd be remiss not to thank Macular who is the managing editor of Science Business, who compiled this report. Thank you, Mula. and also Jopi Baconi, who many of you who have probably dealt with science business know. I mean, she is my wing person, and without her, this project would not have occurred. And I'm grateful to both of them for the fine dedication that they've given to make this project such a great success. So what's included in the report, basically there are 4 core findings. I know that some of these findings are embryonic heavy. That was not our intention, but what we found is that by limiting embryonic, potentially in Europe, and embryonic stem cell research, it does have a knock-on effect on other aspects of research going forward. So the general feeling was cutting embryonic stem cell research on Horizon 2010 would radically damage regenerative medicine in Europe. Stem cells are the gold standard, and they need to be seen as a scientific reference point to move forward. So if you can't actually benchmark against them, that is a huge problem. And so we actually need those things available to us. There is no justification on the grounds of commercial potential for saying that stem cells should not be funded. In other words, there's nothing commercially that you can't commercialize. This was one of the reasons that was being discussed by the members of Parliament, that if we can't commercialize, if we can't patent, we shouldn't be able to fund this research. That is a red herring. And funding this under Horizon 2020 would have a disproportionate effect, primarily because nobody doing research wants to split their research pipelines geographically by where they can do stem cells and where they cannot. So even though it would only be part of an infraction or part of a problem or a limitation on research, the fact is nobody's going to divide their R&D pipeline, so you would essentially be pushing it to places where they want to do all the research they want to do. So with that short introduction, I think it makes sense for us to move to our first discussion, and this is with Ruth McKernan. Ruth, good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Good morning. I certainly can.
Thank you. I hope I did justice to the issue, Ruth, in 8 minutes.
We'll all do our best.
Thank you, Bill. You know, obviously, Pfizer has an enormous research footprint in the UK and in Europe, and I'd be very interested. Obviously, we've discussed this, and it's certainly contained in the report that I'm sure everyone's now frantically downloading and flipping through. But if you could just outline, you know, what was the motivation for Pfizer to set up such an extensive research pipeline here in Europe, and how you feel that's been going, and sort of comment a bit on some of the issues I've brought up and what has occurred in the last 6 to 8 months, which has seen so much activity in this space. I pass it to you.
Certainly, I'll be happy to do that. So good morning, everybody who's on the call. I'll start first by talking a little bit about our regenerative medicine efforts. We started Pfizer Regenerative Medicine in 2008, and at that time we had a small group in Boston and a larger group in the UK. The reason Pfizer chose to put effort in both places was in part because of the uncertainty about the regulatory environment, and it was at that time certainly very positive in the UK, and we were able to get set up here very quickly. In 2011, actually, all of our regenerative medicine cell therapy work was consolidated into the unit that I head here in Cambridge. And that was part of a global restructuring effort. We are taking very much a long view in cell therapy. We started by looking at various different approaches to cell therapy, autologous, allogeneic, whether we should use adult stem cells or embryonic stem cells. And we have alighted on 2 projects that I'll talk about that are either in clinical development or very close to the clinic. The first one of those is a collaboration that we have with a company called Epithelium based in Cleveland. In that program, we're looking at adult stem cells that are derived from the bone marrow, expanded, and we're testing to see whether they have benefit in ulcerative colitis. And that is a program that's in the middle of its clinical study at present. The second project that we have alighted on is a therapy for macular degeneration for people who are destined to go blind. And this project uses human embryonic stem cells and is a partnership with University College London. And our key collaborators there are Peter Coffey and Lyndon de Cruz. We use human embryonic stem cells because it is only that source that at the time of starting the project we were able to differentiate into retinal pigment epithelium. This is the cell type that is lost in macular degeneration, and our proposal is to make a monolayer of retinal pigment epithelial cells on an immobile support which is placed behind the macula of the patient and thereby replaces the cells that are lost in the disorder. We have been able to make those cells. We've been able to make a support and grow them very well in the lab. We've run safety studies, and we have filed to start our clinical trial this year. And we are in current dialogue with the regulatory agencies about that. So that is a program I am extremely excited about. We've been working on it for several years now, and we are excited to see whether it's safe and well tolerated in patients, and later to know whether it's efficacious and in what types of macular degeneration we might see benefit. I would add, of course, that it does take many years to make a medicine. In the pharmaceutical industry, 15 years is about the average, and I don't see any reason why cell therapies should be any quicker. There may be instances when we might get them approved earlier on license, but in general I think we have to expect that to make a cell therapy, it's a 10-year commitment. And so there will be many bumps and hurdles in the road, as there always is in drug development. So the regulations from Europe and from the rest of the world will need refining and changing as we understand how best to manage cell therapies, how to maintain their safety, how to maintain the safety of patients. So I'm expecting there to be many rulings, many changes over the next few years. And while we take careful note of what's happening, I think we really need to understand whether the therapies work well and whether they benefit patients. And then my belief is that for therapies that do really well and for which there are huge patient benefit, we will find a business model for commercializing those and bringing them to patients. It may not be the traditional pharma model as we currently know it, and for those reasons I think we have to work very closely with biotechs, with SMEs, with venture capitalists to really explore how to bring these medicines together to patients together. I think the international competition in this area is intense. It would be very difficult for European countries to go it alone. And I think it's important that we have a good environment for research and that the European countries, SMEs and pharma work together to bring medicines to patients in the best ways we can. And, you know, it'll be in many different ways, but I am optimistic about the opportunities that we have. I'll pause there.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Just a quick question. Can you dwell into a little bit why, Weiser specifically chose the UK? Was it the quality of the science? Was it the infrastructure? Was it the regulatory environment? I mean, what is it that made you pull that trigger and make that decision?
At the time of setting up regenerative medicine, which is now incorporated into New Centis, the US had presidential lines for research, and there was a lot of challenge actually for researchers in the United States, where much of Pfizer's research goes on. For people in the United States, there were some logistical hurdles for them working on embryonic stem cells. In the UK, I think it's recognized that there is a core of really strong scientific expertise here and a really good regulatory structure for the use of and the generation of human embryonic stem cell lines. And that was certainly a positive factor. Because we already had research here, it was easy to build on that. But I definitely would say that the positive regulatory environment and the strength of UK science was a factor in making that decision, yes.
Thank you, Ruth, for that clarification. I suppose this is, if we're talking about EU regulatory environment, it makes sense for us to go to Magda, who's the Director of Science Policy at the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, as well as being their chair for the IMI. Good morning, Magda. Are you there?
Good morning. I am.
Thank you. I think Ruth has given a great summary of the technology decision and the science decision, and that's led us into the sort of regulatory environment, which they're doing their very large investment in Europe. Can you just outline what you think Europe, let's leave the Horizon 2020 discussions off the table for now. What do you think Europe was doing well, or what was leading to a company like Weiser spending, hundreds of millions of pounds a year on R&D in Europe as opposed to the U.S. under the old regime? And how do you see this going forward, given the sort of clarification, I'd say, or the lack of muddiness that has sort of emerged from the EACHR committee, Magda, if you wouldn't mind?
Okay. I think I'll take it, and good morning, everyone. I think I take it from where Ruth and you had just stopped. Is it that the UK had both good regulation, tight scrutiny, and scientific expertise on which Pfizer could build and many other companies could build, and therefore this has attracted a lot of investments in this field, which is the future of medicine in many fields. So if I take it from there and to look at what are the EU ambitions for healthcare, for research, and for economy. So on the one hand, the EU sets extremely ambitious goals for healthcare policies. We talk about more healthy years, more personalized medicines, more active people at work. In addition to that, the EU sets also very ambitious industrial policy to try to not only maintain but also to attract more industries with high tech added value and growth potential. And all that, of course, for the sake of innovation, economic growth, investments, and getting more innovation directly to the European patients and consumers quicker, because where the investments take place, this is where the priority access will take place as well. So now we have to look at the EU framework for research and science. And Horizon 2020 as a concept tries to actually reconcile those two, or rather combine them in one policy, and to support both achieving these ambitious healthcare goals and create a better economic framework for companies to come and invest. But for these ambitions to be fulfilled, the EU should also incentivize cutting-edge scientific activities and technologies. And this is where sometimes we see a little bit of this discrepancy between what our ambition is and what kind of technologies do we really support here in Europe. And it's not just about stem cells or embryonic stem cells, it's also about using animals in research or even nanotechnology. So, there are areas which may be subject to political compromises and where the more emotions or political compromise drives the setting of the legislation. But when we talk about science, it is really the science that should drive the legislation. And this requires rational and well-informed discussion, which involves also those whose lives and well-being is at stake, so the patients and possibly the consumers as well. In the case of the stem cells in particular and regenerative medicine, we are no longer talking about something, nebulous promise of the future. We are talking about products and therapies that are either reaching the patients already or just about to reach them. So we have to be very careful when legislating about or ruling out certain technologies or enablers in this field. And if we look at what Nature is publishing in the last 2 weeks, it all goes into the direction of cell therapies and regenerative medicine and personalized medicine. So these scientific achievements are just around the corner, and that's why we have to be much more careful today than we could be in the future.
Magda, can I just jump in and ask you a quick question, if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah.
Are you concerned, or do you see that stem cells could be the next GMO sort of discussion, genetic modified, or are we concerned about that in Europe? Is that a possibility?
I think the risk is always there, although I was extremely encouraged by the two steps that happened recently. On the one hand, the European Court of Justice and German court clarification on the Bristler case. I think that was extremely encouraging. And on the other hand, the EU institutions' preliminary agreement on maintaining the status quo for financing for stem cells, including embryonic stem cells. So I think in a way, the discussion at this point goes into the right direction, because after all, this is about what role we want Europe to play in the future. Do we want to take the approach of not in my backyard, which was in the case of GMOs and still is about other technologies, or do we rather prefer to take a leadership position and do it here, because we have this combination of tight scrutiny, good regulation, and ethical approaches which guarantee good quality science, and with the respect also of all ethical rules. So while there is still a certain degree of uncertainty on the European institutions' approach on the Horizon 2020, as it is the case also for funding for healthcare research in general, I think that we shall maintain the dialogue and continue discussing with policymakers and explaining what is the role of stem cells, embryonic stem cells, and other enabling technologies. But I think that the first good step was taken, and we just need to continue on this path.
Yeah, Ruth, if I can go back to you, I mean, what's your feeling about ITRA? You know, basically this coming out of the ITRA committee, that's the committee that needs to approve or not approve scientific funding under Horizon 2020. I mean, did you breathe a sigh of relief? Do you feel it's sort of not important? What's your opinion, Ruth? How do you feel about that?
Well, you know, I think there's going to be a lot more discussion, and we operate in a global environment. So, as I say, we watch, we listen, we wait, but I don't react too strongly to every individual piece of legislation.
That's probably very healthy, Ruth. I'm sure you have very good blood pressure. Thank you, ladies, both of you. Magda, it's I guess from our standpoint, it'll be interesting to see how the discussions continue on Horizon 2020, because right now the impasse is between basically you have the entire Parliament standing against the entire Council. How do you see this moving forward from your inside track with regards to the IMI? You're very involved with the debate here at the political level. What do you see happening, or what do you think will happen? I mean, if you can read the tea leaves.
Okay, just very, very briefly. I think that the biggest concern for the moment is about the funding for research in general. The entire 80 billion euro budget is at stake, and I think this is one of the key discussions, is how much we would maintain, or Europe would decide to maintain, of a funding for future framework program, and how much of this cake would be dedicated to healthcare research. For the rest of the Horizon 2020, while well, I think that the Council has taken a very reasonable position. I'm much more concerned about the number of amendments and the changes in the structure and rules that the European Parliament has proposed. So I think that there is still a lot of discussions that have to take place in order not to completely destroy the original Commission proposal, which set very good structure for the future of research in Europe.
Now, we had a session with the main rapporteurs for the Parliament about a month and a half ago, and James Ellis, who's on the Finance Committee, his position was, we don't do anything if we're not happy with what comes out of the Council. We just sit on our hands, and we just utilize the current rule within the Parliament that allows the past bill to basically just reauthorize itself with the cost of living adjustment, basically a subsidy for inflation. I mean, do you see that as a reasonable solution?
I think there is no ideal solution other than adopting a good budget for research and dedicated resources, and being clear of what, and making sure that they are consistent with the level of ambition in the research program. So status quo, what you describe, is possibly a very much fallback position, and if the worst comes to worst, then yes, but ideally there should be a more rational discussion about the future of research and funding for research, and also use of enabling technologies in this context.
Thank you, Megan. I'd like to point out we're getting inundated with questions right now. Please, people, continue to send the questions in chat. We will get to them momentarily. I still want to get to a couple of our other presenters, and at this point I'd like to bring in Catherine Littler from the Wellcome Trust, the second largest private funder of research in the world after the Gates Foundation, if I'm not mistaken. Good morning, Catherine. How are you?
Good morning.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone.
And
Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
Good.
Thank you very much. Obviously, Wellcome Trust, Magda and Ruth are dealing with many of the discoveries that have occurred after you've been involved creating the new therapies, really very early stage research funding and research strategies. How do you feel about the current situation of Wellcome Trust regarding the debate about funding and stem cell research in Europe in general, what has happened at ITRA, and the current follow-on ruling out of the German court? If you could just give us an outline from basic research's perspective, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Well, I guess the fundamental issue to underline, which is Ruth's alluded to earlier, is that obviously research is now collaborative and international, therefore international in nature. So what happens in Europe, regardless of whether we fund the majority of our research in the UK or Europe or internationally, it's relevant all over the world. So any negative messages that come out of Europe in terms of funding and the regulatory environment could harm the ability of researchers, one, just to carry out that research in that particular field or to work internationally. The second point to make, I think, is it can have a massive negative impact economically as people, not necessarily us as funders, but other funders, investors, are less likely to invest in that kind of environment. Which leads me on to really, I guess, we are always concerned about the regulatory environment. As a major funder, we always are keen to see that there's a regulatory environment that fosters research. And in order to do that, I think there are quite a few elements you need. In terms of regenerative medicine, both at a national, European and international level, I guess one of the most important things you need is a level of certainty, and Ruth alluded to that earlier in relation to where Pfizer placed their funding when there was debates in the States regarding stem cell usage. So I think that's important to have a level of certainty, and the sands aren't shifting constantly all the time. I think you need clarity in both your legislation, your regulation, your guidance, all the way down, because it's very difficult for researchers to operate in an environment where they're not sure what's going to happen next or what the actual law or regulations asking them to do. The other thing I think the trust is very keen to see across the board is proportionality. Some of the research has some types of risks associated with it, but all regulation and legislation needs to be weighed against, the risks associated needs to be weighed against the public benefits in doing that research, and then that regulation needs to be proportionate to that. I think the other thing that we're really keen to see in regulation, both nationally and at a European level, is that there's a level of streamlining of the rules, that they're not too overcomplicated. People don't have to look at 5 different pieces of legislation when they're trying to conduct research, that there's streamlining, that they look across different pieces of legislation, whether they be the Clinical Trials Directive, and then they match that as much as they can and harmonise with national legislation. I think that leads to the point about harmonisation. I mean, I think we have to uphold the principles of subsidiarity, but also harmonise as much as possible. So if you are conducting research across Europe, there's not differing rules the whole way along, so it makes it very overcomplicated for you to work out what's going on in each country where you're conducting those research projects. The other thing that I think hasn't come up that really is important and that we can't underestimate is the importance of public engagement in this field. The Trust is heavily involved in both public engagement itself and funding activities and public engagement. It comes out in the report, not in my section, but it's about, I think it's important that the public understands why we want to conduct this type of research. that it's about focusing on patient need. When they revised in the UK, when they revised the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act in 2008, there was a lot of public engagement work done alongside it, and it showed that there was strong support for this type of research if the public understood why researchers are doing it. So I think it's important for us to make a note to ourselves as researchers and funders that we need to communicate to the public the realistic expectations about conducting regenerative medicine, about why we're doing it and the importance of it. I don't think we can underestimate that at all. I think they're probably the main points I wanted to make in relation to research and the funder's perspective.
Thank you, Catherine. Now, I just want to touch a bit on this idea of the commonality of regulation across Europe, because the essential position that we have now is that basically research can be done, but it's up to the local countries to decide if they're going to do it or not. So basically the EU will fund it as long as it doesn't collide with local law. Do you think from your perspective that that doesn't work? Is that inhibiting your research activities?
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, you have to adhere to the rules of the national governments, and I think as long as it's clear and you know where you can and cannot conduct the research, then that's fine. In the countries in which you can conduct the research at the European level where you're making legislation, it would be nice as much as possible to harmonise so you know what you can do in those countries. I think that's the point. But I don't think we can say tell an individual country themselves at a European level that they can and can't conduct certain types of research.
Yeah, and we've had one question here from Rowan Pochet that I will bring in now, and he's bringing in how do you get over the so-called ethical religious restrictions that are now these local national level issues that are now drifting into the Parliament. I mean, isn't it logical that as the Parliament becomes more and more of an initial decision-making authority within the European institutions, that we are going to see these type of decisions similar to what we've had in the United States? Isn't it just inevitable from your perspective, Catherine?
In what sense you mean that they're going to be made more at a European level and less at a national level? So
yeah, because a lot of these national issues are going to start drifting into the European level just by nature of the localization of these issues existing in the Parliament by nature of the way that people are elected. Isn't that going to be a natural affect of what we've got on the structure?
Yes, and I think we can already see that encroaching into the European level. But I think you need to make it at European as allowable for people to an environment as allowable for people to do the research that we believe is necessary and in the patient's interest, and then leave that down to the individual nation states to decide their particular views on whether that is allowed in that environment.
Now, and with one final question then, now with regards to your current research portfolio, as it were, how do you see this evolving? I mean, where is the Wellcome Trust 5-10 years ago as to where the vast majority of their research funding was going, which countries? And do you see, as this is becoming more of an international research effort, do you see your portfolio expanding into jurisdictions and areas you weren't anticipating or are becoming new?
I mean, over the last 5 to 10 years, our funding in this area has definitely become more international in nature. I think over 40% of the papers generated by the Trust in this field have a researcher from another country. So I think it will be a broadening, and you can't underestimate what's coming out of Asia, what's coming out of China, what's coming out of Singapore, some of the research that's coming out of there. So I think we'll definitely be funding more of an international nature. So it's critical for us to keep an eye on what's happening on regulation and individual level country views. But yes, I think the Trust, I mean, we're still funding a lot of basic research. We're moving towards some levels of translational research, but we'll still there's a lot to be done in our view, still at the basic fundamental science level.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. Again, we've got a few questions coming in. If people would like to continue to submit their questions via chat, there's a chat function on the right-hand side of your interactive operable screen that you have for the tool. Please feel free to send them in, and we'll answer them as we can. I'd like to bring in one of our last speakers today. This is Theo Mert from Janssen Pharmaceutica. Theo is working with we were discussing an extended research pipeline, and Catherine from the Wellcome Trust sees the trust moving further and further into greater collaboration efforts in this field. Theo, this is your job. This is what you do. You work with external innovation and partnerships in regenerative medicine. How do you see, I guess, from the first question, how do you see Europe's current regime, the discussions on Horizon 2020, the controversies we've been dealing with, or the difficulties over the last 5 to 6 months on interpreting regenerative medicine in Europe? How do you see this interacting with your desire and your role at using research internationally? How do you see these things playing together with Janssen and by extension J&J and your partners?
Good morning all, this is Tim here. I hope you hear me well.
We hear you fine.
Okay, thanks. Going further on your question, Duane, yes, as a function of being external innovation for an international company, Janssen is part of Johnson & Johnson. Of course, it's very important to understand what kind of research can be performed in which part of the world, because for us the world is our way and is our floor to work on. Now, with regard to producible cells, and especially what we are looking for is the use of inducible pluripotent cells, so the iPS cells. For us, any obstructions by legal aspects may have a major impact on our possibilities. Now, as you know, within the field of iPS cells, there is still a lot of research to be done. The aim or the final goal is that we would be able to use human cells or material derived from human biopsies as alternative and improved screening technologies, not only for disease areas like in the area of CNS, but also as alternative ways for safety pharmacology, using alternative models for cardiovascular testing, using alternative models for ADME testing and kidney failures and things like that. Now, having said that, it's extremely important that our research, since it's strategic basic, can be done on a relatively large-scale pre-competitive level. Why? Because we need a lot of information. We have a lot of uncertainties around the predictability of these models, the validation of these models, and all the different steps to reach our final goal. So the fewer limitations there are to exchange, and exchange means materials from hospitals, from patients to pharma, but also exchange among the communities, and communities being academic, small companies, and larger pharma. The fewer of these rules, the better for us. And we have several examples of where already pre-competitive consortia have been built up on local levels with local governmental fundings, like in the UK, some of the research councils, Flemish government fundings as examples, but also on international levels. And Ruth already mentioned some of the IMI initiatives, the stem cell banking, the new banking initiative she is mentioning, but also on levels with the National Institute of Mental Health, where we, with several pharmaceutical companies, combined with also some biotechs and charity foundations like the New York Stem Cell Foundation, trying to get to general agreements amongst the people who are working in the field to try to solve these issues.
Hey, Theo, let me
give examples of all, but go
Theo,
ahead.
let me just ask you a question then. How important do you feel is having those public groups' involvement in this? You know, the New York Stem Cell Organization, the Public Stem Cell Organization. Do you think that helps in driving the research forward? Is that something that you see as vital?
Yeah, I think it's vital that they are involved. Why? Because on one hand, they are easier to making the link, and they would help to decommercialize, between brackets, to use that word, the face versus the industry.
Do you see that that's happening more in other places than in Europe? Are we not doing that enough in Europe?
I think the involvement of patient groups and trying to get a different charity organizations involved, the more, I would say, the better. And I think Europe still can catch up. Or I would love to see more involvement.
Let me go to Catherine on that. Catherine, from the Wellcome Trust perspective, you obviously were running other initiatives in this space. do you feel that this is something that you folks see as strategic to your efforts, is to have that community engagement? And should this be some way to move forward in Europe that we should be looking at more aggressively? Catherine, we can't hear you, Catherine. If you could turn on your microphone, perhaps. I'm sorry, we've lost Catherine.
Can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you very much.
Oh, good. Sorry, there was a problem with my microphone. Yes, I think without a doubt we have to get other funders and patient groups involved in this area, in regenerative medicine, and understanding why we're doing it. And I think in some areas they are. In the UK there's a lot of activity in this world. BHF has some groups that are looking at this. When we got together to look at the stem cell statement that we issued to the European Parliament and the European Commission of Member States, calling on them to maintain funding of human embryonic stem cell research under Horizon 2020, we ended up with a coalition of 19 funders and patient groups. So there is a lot of interest in here, and I think there is an onus on us to work together with these groups to make people understand why why this science is so important.
And let me go to Ruth then. I hope Ruth, if I'm not catching you off guard. You're going to be launching a trial, I understand, in the UK. Are you working with patient groups? Is this part of your strategy in the process of developing the trial group?
Well, interestingly, the project that we work on with University College London was initiated under more of a charitable banner called the London Project, where people actually campaign to get money from a charitable source to start doing that research. So this clinical program actually has its origins in patient groups and charitable donations. So I see that as a great success, that sort of work can lead on to pharma interest and clinical trials that are required to bring a product to patients.
I'd like to go back to Teo. One quick question for you here. What percentage of your efforts now in these sort of coalitions is done inside of Europe, and how much is a multinational involving the U.S. and Asia? Teo, I mean, do you see more and more of that activity being ex-Europe, or Europe is a part of a larger multinational organization?
No, I think Europe is a part of the multinational, and even I dare to say at present that a lot of different other regions are looking to Europe. If we look to what's already available by the IMI initiatives, and Ruth can address that also better. But if you look to the initiatives already ongoing there, several of the small biotechs which are having key roles, and the UK has several of them. With I think we are more advanced than what you, for instance, see in the US and than what you see in the Asia Pacific area. On the other hand, I mean, since, as said, we are part of international research communities, of course, there is a large exchange of possibilities among the different areas. But at present, for us, I would say it's like a 50-50.
Okay, that's very interesting. Well, again, I'd like to thank all four of you for your contributions. I have a few questions here. We've got a couple anonymous ones that have been emailed to me. We have a few others that are coming in via the chat function. I'm just going to ask these and open them up to the floor. One of the questions that's come from David Gordon in the United States. I'm assuming he's up early. Good morning, David. What would be the best outcome that you would anticipate emerging from Horizon 2020? What would you like to see? That's the question. So on this ruling Horizon 2020, what would you feel would be the best possible outcome? So Ruth, I'll start with you. What would you like out of Horizon 2020? What would you like to see to emerge for funding in embryonic space?
I would like us to, first of all, get the coordination of producing iPS cells from patients and have those available for research in academia, biotech and pharma companies to allow us to accelerate developing new medicines. That's the first thing I'd like to see. It's really imperative that pharma companies, SMEs and researchers, academic researchers, work very closely together. funding is tight. It's tight for everybody, and we can't afford to duplicate work unnecessarily. So I would like to see Horizon 2020 bring together people in different parts of the research ecosystem to make therapeutic medicines more effectively and faster. It's a big ask, but it's important.
Thank you very much. Magda, what would you like to see as the best case scenario for the European Pharmaceutical Association and associations?
Well, just to build on what Ruth has just said, for this to happen, we need sufficient funding and encouraging collaborative research to the similar extent as the Innovative Medicines Initiative is doing today. So I think that we just need more public-private partnerships and sufficient funding for these type of collaborations for the future.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, what would you like?
Well, obviously I'm going to support the two previous points, but a funding and regulatory environment that fosters research, really, that isn't confusing, that allows people to understand that they can do all types of regenerative medicine research, I think, would be our ultimate aim.
And Theo, what would you want for Janssen Pharmaceutical? What would you
I think based on what we already hear from Ruth, Magda, and Catherine, I think what we want to have added to that is a link to patient recordings, so that based on the possibility to get cells available, to have them available for the different research groups, that we also have a good understanding where they are coming from, what their history is, so that we can link phenotypical data or any screening approaches from these cells and they use to the real clinical world for the patient's understanding.
No, that's fine. And just I'd like to follow that, and I got a question following up with that, Theo. Are there regions in the world that you think are doing a better job than Europe is right now in that space, sort of getting to that level, getting the banks, getting the data in line? Do you know of a region, or where do you see as best practice? Is it Europe or somewhere else?
No, I think Europe is quite good in this, in the sense that they are realizing the problem. They are starting to tackle it with the Stain Bank initiative. There are some initiatives on patient recordings on different local and international levels ongoing. I think another group who is doing it is the NIH and the NIMH. They also start to realize that bringing samples and patient recordings together for researchers in the broad sense, academical and industrial, that's the way forward in the pre-competitive field.
And the NIHM, you're working with them as part of your coalition, is that correct?
That's correct. And several of the people here on the call our colleagues of them are linked to that also. That's true. Excellent. But they are looking to Europe and to what we are doing, so we are clearly not behind them. But they, as you know, once they are starting something, they can progress rapidly.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of money behind it usually. Ruth, is there anywhere else you think is doing a good job as far as best practice or benchmarking against Europe? Do you see any other areas that you have your eye on and saying, wow, that's really good work?
I think there's initiatives going on all over the world, and this is a very big and fast emerging scientific area. Clearly in terms of iPS cells, Japan is doing very well. They've taken a clear strategy to try and develop new therapies on a very individualized basis using iPS cells made from each specific donor. And so they have a unique approach, and it's admirable. I think different parts of the world are biting off separate parts of the whole problem, but like Catherine, I would argue very much for where we can get harmonized policies. It makes things easier. If we're trying to bring medicines out in many different countries of the world with different regulations of how that cell product has to be managed, whether it can have animal sources of molecules in there or not, there's a lot of complication in a cell product. It's not as definable as an antibody or a small chemical drug. So I think harmonization is important, and I don't think anybody's doing that well at the moment.
Okay. I have another couple questions here that have come in. This is from a Daniela Couto, who's a researcher in Portugal that we've worked with at Science Business a bit. She's asking, do you consider that there is a market space or an opportunity for new startups in stem cells to join? And what do you think would be the best strategy for them to do so? In other words, obviously Pfizer and Janssen, J&J, you are large companies. How could a small player sort of get their foot in the door if they have an interesting technology? What do you recommend? And I'll leave that to Ruth first. Do you want to take it?
Yes, I'm happy to comment on that, and I think absolutely there's a lot of space. Cell therapy is a really disruptive technology. We've seen many new companies come in. Some have done really well, some have not done so well. There are some great initiatives, particularly the ones I know about in the UK, the Biocatalyst Fund funded by the MRC, the Technology Strategy Board. But this is an area that VCs are also very interested in, and I would encourage people to, come up with good ideas. And I'm not wanting to volunteer myself to everybody that's out there, but I definitely think this is an area where capital is available and funders are enthusiastic.
That's fine, Ruth. I won't give out your email, I promise. But Teo, what about your network? What percentage of the people who are involved in your international network are sort of the S on the SME scale? How many of them live in that sort of quadrant?
I think if you look through all the collaborations and meetings and activities we are having, at least about a third to 40% is of that level. So they are heavily involved. Also, industry is heavily looking to them because it's not a core business of large pharma to come up with technologies to provide these tools. So there is, as Ruth said, there is a huge opportunity for mutual interactions.
And Catherine, from the Wellcome Trust perspective, how have you seen your investments made 5 or 6 years ago bearing fruit? Have you had any successful transitions into Ruth's purview, as it were? Things moved into her orbit successfully? What have you seen happening?
Well, obviously we fund in this field through our technology transfer division, and definitely we are seeing some of the fruits of the labour go through to the further end of the scale. So I think I definitely reiterate Ruth's point that there's room for investment from venture capitalists, and there's room for investment for things like our initiative, like our tech transfer. And there's definitely room for small companies moving through with good original ideas of how to do some of these translational movements.
And Maggie,
Wayne, I would add,
go ahead.
One other thing quickly before we move on is that most major pharma companies have some kind of VC or investment arm, and we all have business development groups, and generally easy to find on the pharma company's website. So I would also encourage people with really good ideas in regenerative medicine and stem cells to get in touch with our business development functions.
Thank you, and that's a great idea. We just received a question here from Julian Hitchcock, who many of us know from, he obviously consults the UK government and the Wellcome Trust, as for a matter of fact, on stem cell regulation. I'll leave this open to the floor. Actually, Magda, maybe you'll want to chime in on this. The European Commission is consulting on the ATMP regulation. What changes, if any, would members of the panel recommend to ensure that the EU regime is optimized? Magda, are you familiar with that? I have to admit I am not familiar with that consultation. So, Magda, are you familiar with what's going on there?
I'm not directly, so I would not comment very extensively on that. But I know that within FPR there is a lot of discussions about this legislation, in particular about the hospital exemption. So I think that's one of the points that would need to be sorted out in the coming debate.
Yeah, and this obviously gets into the variance between the various countries, and who's driving a bus through the loophole right now and who is not. But I don't know.
Absolutely.
I know it's been a problem, but I don't know what the discussion is of trying to close the loopholes or not. Ruth, are you aware of anything that's going on in this space?
I think it's too early for me to comment because we are in the process of pulling together our response to that. So I don't really have anything refined that I could share.
Fine. And Teo, any position on this from you guys?
No, not at the moment neither.
Okay, sorry, Julian. Anyway, no, for those of you who aren't aware, this is a regulation that allows, there's a certain variance in the law. There was an exemption put in place about if people needed to have done phase trials, et cetera, on stem cell therapies, and some of them are given a hospital a hospital exemption. Some of them were given a hospital exemption that allowed them to then get into the hospital space without having to go through trials, and there's certain controversies around that. So that's sort of the situation with this. I think at this point we should, I think we're just about out of time. I'd like to very much thank all of our panelists, Ruth, Magda, Catherine, Teo. I appreciate we're all extremely busy, even though it's January. My agenda is already full, as I'm sure yours is. And I appreciate very much your participation. We had a very good crowd today of about 70 people online, and I'd like to thank all of you for submitting your questions. And I will be following up with some of the questions we didn't answer to the panel, and we'll be looping back out. Again, I would highly encourage everyone, I will now show that address again, please feel free to download our report. Everyone you've been hearing from today has contributed, and I would highly encourage you to download this. It is free. And also, if you're not a member of ScienceBusiness.net, please sign up for the free weekly bulletin, who gives you an opportunity to communicate with us and find out all the things that are happening here. So on behalf of the panel and on behalf of Science Business, I'd like to say thank you, all of you, for your participation, and we'll be in contact soon. And panelists, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
That's our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.